Biden's approval rating has been sinking throughout the year. He had a 57% approval rating back in February 2021, according to Gallup. 4 major polls released this week show about 42% of Americans approve of how Biden is handling his job as president, with around 56% disapproving. According to an AP poll, less than 30% of Americans want Biden to run for another term, including less than half of Democrats. When being asked about this at Wednesday's press conference, here's how Biden responded.
I didn't overpromise, and what I have probably outperformed what anybody thought would happen.
An NBC poll shows only 5% of Americans said Biden's presidency has been better than expected, the lowest since 1994. Today marks President Biden's first year in the Oval Office. Democrats are praising some of what they view as his achievements, while Republicans say Biden's done a poor job uniting the country. What's Biden's plan for this next year? NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
Democrats are zeroing in on 4 areas in specific that they see as successes during the Biden administration. That is, passing the American Rescue Plan to help our country get through the pandemic, and Biden's overall COVID response, providing free masks and tests to American people, and the recovery in the jobs market. And today, President Biden is zeroing in yet again on his infrastructure law. Him and the vice president today met with top leaders in their administration to discuss the progress made on this front.
Our nation has never fully made this kind of investment. And so the detail matters, execution matters, and I'm looking forward to an update on where we are now and where we're going from here.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi today kicking off her press conference with a speech on the jobs recovery over the past year.
As we all know, much more needs to be done, but we have made great progress in this year. Just to say one of the most important 4-letter words in our economy is jobs.
But Republicans had critical remarks, one of them being that Biden has not lived up to his commitment to bipartisanship. They also zeroed in on inflation.
Biden needs to pivot. He's got to get away from representing the radical left. He's got to think of, how do I help the average American? What's the average American want? They don't want their gas prices up. They want food prices down.
So how to deal with this inflation? The Democrat caucus chairman told us earlier this week that in Congress they're working to address issues of market power, specifically in the food industry.
The food industry and meat processors and the dynamics that exist there, because we do believe there's a lot of pandemic price gouging that is taking place.
And President Biden's idea for lowering costs, continuing to work out supply chain constraints, and his Build Back Better spending bill.
So here's what we're going to do. A critical job in making sure that the elevated prices don't become entrenched rests with the Federal Reserve. If price increases are what you're worried about, the best answer is my Build Back Better plan.
So, Melina, on this Build Back Better bill, it looks like President Biden and the Democrats are not willing to let it go, but it's stalled right now and obviously can't actually be put into law as it is now. What's the next step for Biden on this front?
So actually, President Biden and top Democrats seem to be conceding that they'll have to scale back this bill or settle for only passing certain parts of it. And we heard that from President Biden himself during that press conference yesterday. Here's exactly what he said.
We can get pieces, big chunks of the Build Back Better law signed into law.
Speaker Pelosi echoed that same message at her press conference today. And earlier this week, I asked the Democrat caucus chairman if they're considering or working on a more scaled back version of this bill. And he said that while negotiation talks are ongoing, they're really hopeful and they're pushing to get the most important pieces of that bill across the finish line, if not the entire bill itself.
So aside from this, what other things does Biden and the Democrats have on their agenda?
Well, aside from that, Speaker Pelosi says they're going to be focused on getting a long-term government funding bill passed. We know they've passed a few temporary funding bills, but nothing long-term. And they're being forced to face this now as the deadline comes up in February when that government funding expires. Now, other than that, Pelosi says Democrats are focused on revamping the labor market and helping with that jobs recovery, which we know is one key priority for President Biden, as well as helping to further ease supply chain constraints and further implement his infrastructure law. Steve?
President Biden just marked his first year since taking office, and his report cards are coming in. Here to discuss the president's first year and the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics is South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman. Congressman Ralph Norman, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
My pleasure.
Congressman, I want to talk to you about China. With the upcoming Olympic Games, there's so much wrong with this picture, from the obvious disregard from human rights in that country. And now we have warnings to Americans that will be participating in these Olympic Games that they'll be spied on by this mandatory app that is supposed to be used to navigate the Olympic Village, and that it's compromised. So, Congressman, when is enough enough when it comes to dealing with and legitimizing this Chinese Communist Party?
Well, it should be. Enough is enough. It should be by every American. I think the American people realize it. Unfortunately, this Biden administration does not. Look at the ties that Anthony Fauci has with his mutual funds, having, I think it's 10.4 million in funds that communist China has its stranglehold on. Look what they're doing to the Uyghurs. Look at the history of a communist country, and here we are having this administration not having the foresight to at least put some sanctions on them for what they did with the coronavirus. We know it came from the lab, but it's just an ongoing pattern of letting China and all the other rogue countries get by with hating America, and we're paying a price for it. Look what we paid with COVID. We shouldn't even be participating in the Olympics. I know he says that there'll be no officials that attend there, but we need to do more than that. Again, it's actions more than just words, and he doesn't have a clue about it.
Now, with the Olympics, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, of course. Do you think that by allowing Beijing to pull this off does further legitimize them when in the face of all of the things that you just mentioned?
Not only legitimize it, it condones it. I'm reminded of the single man that stood before the tanks back in 1989, where you never heard from him again. Anybody that disagrees with this administration in China, you never hear from them. How does that work for freedom? When you have their newspapers saying that free speech will not get in the way of the communist regime, basically, that's just intolerable. You don't condone that, and by participating in the Olympics, as well as look at the basketball teams that go there, all for the greed of money. But you just overlook the human rights violations that have continued and will continue under the communist regime, and to infiltrate our great country, nah, it's sad to say the least.
Now, Congressman, this week marks President Biden's first year in office. He's underwater in a lot of polls out there. He's even taking heat from a lot of Democrats. What's your assessment of his first year?
Total disaster. Steve, this administration has, in a short 11 months, totally derailed this country. The big question I get when I'm out in the district talking with people is why? Why did he leave Americans behind in Afghanistan? Why did he do away with our natural gas and oil, put Americans out of work? Why is he condoning violence in the streets and not condoning the anarchists and the criminals that do it? The list goes on. And, why is he allowing countries like China to look at Taiwan as, food for their menu? Russia's doing the same with Ukraine, and for him to track back yesterday and say, well, maybe a type of invasion or a limited invasion is okay. It's been a total train wreck, and people are tired of his rhetoric. They want results that are pro-Constitution. They want to get back to living their lives, and with the inflation rate where it is today, people are paying. They're feeling it in their pocketbooks, I guess is the best way to say it. But his first year has been a total disaster. It's all on his administration, and it's all because of the policies. His words don't match the results that he's had.
Congressman Norman, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Several colleges in Virginia are ending their vaccine mandates for faculty and staff. That's in order to comply with a new directive from Governor Glenn Youngkin. George Mason University's website states faculty and staff are strongly encouraged to receive vaccine and booster shots when eligible. but they're no longer mandatory. Vaccine mandates for students taking in-person classes are still in place. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin announced his plan for combating the COVID pandemic Thursday. He encouraged the nearly 1.6 million unvaccinated Virginians to get a vaccine, but not to implement mandates. The governor's plan includes the COVID-19 vaccine Marshall Plan for Virginia, expanded healthcare flexibility, and support and prioritize testing guidelines. FBI agents raided the home and campaign office of Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar on Wednesday. Photos shared by local reporters show agents removing bags, bins, and at least one computer from the congressman's home in Laredo, Texas. Federal agents also went to Cuellar's campaign office. An FBI spokeswoman said agents were, quote, conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity, but did not give further details. Cuellar is a member of the House Appropriations Committee and often criticized President Biden's lax immigration policies. The number of new applications for unemployment benefits last week jumped to 286,000, the highest since mid-October. The Labor Department released the figures today. They show that new claims increased by 55,000 from a week earlier. It's now at 286,000. What the market expected was only around 220,000. Meanwhile, the number of continuing claims rose to over 1.6 million. That's an increase of 84,000 from the previous week. Some analysts say that the numbers are pandemic-related. However, the Labor Department reported earlier this month that the unemployment rate dropped below 4% in November, the first time since the pandemic began. The CIA has issued an interim finding that most cases of Havana syndrome have not been caused by calculated attacks from Russia or other foreign powers.
When you hear them, when you hear what they've been through, there is no doubt in my mind, but that they have had real experiences, real symptoms, and real suffering.
The CIA's interim report delivered to President Biden says that's unlikely, and most of the cases can be explained by other factors like previously undiagnosed illnesses. There are still a few cases that defy explanation. A task force is honing in on about 24 of them for further review. Republican Senator Marco Rubio released a statement and a video on Thursday.
It's important not to misread this report because two things are still true. Number one, there have been people that have been injured and hurt and are suffering, and they deserve care and to be treated seriously. And number two, we still have a handful, and a significant handful of cases in unique places that there is no explanation for, and that in fact are outside the norm. And those need to continue to be looked at, and that needs to be solved.